All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us, of course, by the official beer of the program, Johnny Cuba. European roots with a Caribbean soul, a refreshing German lager in a can. Pick up a six-pack of Johnny Cuba for yourself, your local Sedanos, Presidente, Winn-Dixie, Fresco y Mas. Always drink responsibly. Of course, don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. So finally, we got the Panthers back in action tonight. Last game, I think, was Saturday. So a long break here, a few days in between games, and it's a national game. NHL on TNT tonight. Panthers at Penguins. We got Kenny Albert with us here. He is on the call, of course, tonight. Kenny, always love having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, you're out there in Pittsburgh for the game tonight. But I do want to throw a couple questions at you about the Super Bowl. All right, obviously, NFL on Fox, you're very involved. Number one, you're all over the place with your work schedule. Were you able to sit around with family and watch the Super Bowl this weekend?
I was, Jonathan. I actually worked Saturday and Monday. I had Sunday off, so we went to a friend's house near where we live in New Jersey, and we're able to enjoy the Super Bowl like a normal human being.
Now, when you watch a game like that, are you able to just enjoy it as a fan, or are you thinking in your head the whole time about what's going on from a play-by-play man standpoint?
A little bit of both. I'm definitely thinking about what's going on from a play-by-play standpoint, but I'm also thinking heavily about game management. I'm thinking like a coach because that's what I normally do in the booth while doing play-by-play. So, I'm all over the timeout situation, the clock, the overtime rules, which certainly became a big factor on Sunday. So, I thought the game obviously started a little slow, from a scoring and excitement standpoint, but the second half was real exciting. And then it's funny, in overtime, even though I didn't really have any kind of a stake in who won, I was on the edge of my seat, as I'm sure most people were watching what was taking place during the overtime period.
Okay, so that is, there's two huge stories that come out of the game, right? It's Patrick Mahomes and his standing all time, and it's the overtime and the rules and Kyle Shanahan. When overtime was starting, I looked over to my wife and I said to her, I don't think I know the rules. Like, what were you fully aware watching the game of the rules for overtime? Because I didn't know.
Well, I knew that it was different than the regular season. I was aware that changes were made a couple of years ago to give both teams a possession, even if the first possession resulted in a touchdown. So I knew they were different. I'll have to admit, I did Google right at the end of the fourth quarter just to be sure that what I thought in my mind was accurate, and it turns out it was. I think a lot of people were confused towards the end of the overtime as to why Kansas City did not call any timeouts. But if you listen to the referee, Bill Vinovich, at the start of overtime, he explained that it was like a new game was starting, and the clock would not be an issue towards the end of overtime if it went that far, and that it would continue into a second period if that second team still had possession. So, Andy Reid is certainly aware of the rules, and when you listen to the Kansas City players and coaches, it's something they went over, and I'm sure San Francisco did as well, even though we did read a couple of comments from players that seemed to be confused. I know there's been a lot of debate about Kyle Shanahan, and I could see both sides, why you would want to take the ball first and why you might want to put your defense on the field. But I really don't think you can argue with Kyle Shanahan's thought process, because if both teams scored the same amount of points during their first possession, then it becomes sudden death. So it seems as if Kyle Shanahan's thought process was, we wanted that third possession, which would be sudden death in case we were tied, if both teams didn't score, for example, or if both teams kicked a field goal. Now, I know Mahomes came out and said we would have gone for two if San Francisco had scored a touchdown. So there's a lot of different speculation, but I could definitely see why a team would want the ball first, try and score a touchdown, and then that even if the other team ties it, you have the ball in that sudden death situation.
Yeah, I don't agree with the strategy, but I do understand what he was trying to accomplish there. It obviously didn't work. Now, we're on Wednesday. We are 3 days after the Super Bowl, and I still put on my television this morning, Kenny, and we're talking about the 49ers not knowing the overtime rules. But for the life of me, Kenny, I don't understand why it matters. The only person who needs to know the overtime rules is the decision maker,
Right.
and that's Kyle Shanahan. Why does it matter if the players didn't know the rule?
Right. If you're out on the field, you're trying to score, right? So what's the difference? It turns out McCole Hardman apparently did not know the game was over either when he caught the touchdown. So I'm sure there was a little bit of confusion with certain players. I mean, I think back, it didn't involve overtime rules, but some fascinating conversations with Sean Payton when he was coaching the Saints. And we would do games down the stretch in December when they were battling for first place or a bye or home field advantage. And he told us that he would sit his team down at times during the season, especially during that stretch towards the end of the regular season. He would have the entire team in a meeting room and he would lay it all out, like they had never heard it before. He would put up on the board, if we finish with, at that time, one of the top 2 records in the conference, we don't play the first week. We get a bye. If we finish with the best record in the conference, we have home games all the way through the NFC Championship game. He would lay it all out there because I think he assumed that there were a good portion of his players that had no idea and didn't follow that stuff growing up. They were just outside playing and not necessarily paying attention to how the NFL standings and playoff system worked. So he would lay it all out there for them, as I'm sure most coaches probably do.
Does it seem crazy to you, the way it does me, that Mahomes can actually catch Brady and get to 7? I understand he's got 3 already. 7 still seems so far away.
It does, but when you look at what he's done in his career so far, now he's only 1 behind Montana and Bradshaw, who both won 4. I don't think it's out of the question. Right now, I think you have to consider the Chiefs a dynasty with 2 straight and 3 in 5 years. I know no team's ever won 3 straight Super Bowls or 3 in 4 years would certainly put them up there with the all-time great teams. So, yeah, 7's a long way away. He's not yet halfway there, but with the way his career is progressing, I thought going into the Super Bowl that because Kansas City had Mahomes, in my mind, they were the favorites. When the ball's in his hands, right now he's better than any other quarterback in the league, in my opinion.
So let's get into the game tonight. All right. I'm very excited for Panthers at Penguins tonight. I'm so excited because, number one, I love when my favorite teams are on national TV. Nowadays, League Pass, Sunday Ticket, the center ice package, everyone can watch every game. But like when I was growing up, if my team was on national TV, to me, that was an opportunity for everybody to see how good my team is. I used to love when my team played on national TV. And this Panther team in particular, Kenny, they got to the Stanley Cup final last year. And tell me what you've seen, especially recently. They're significantly better than they were last season.
Well, they're such a fun team to watch. And I had the pleasure and honor of calling their last 9 games last year, the 4 games against Carolina in the conference final and then the 5 games in the Stanley Cup final. But when you look at what they've done so far this year, right behind Boston in the division, 4 points back, shutting out Colorado, one of the top teams in the league on Saturday. Sergei Bobrovsky's playing outstanding hockey. You look at what Matthew Tkachuk's done over the last 6 weeks or so. The season Sam Reinhart's having with 39 goals, just incredible. They were missing a couple of defensemen, key guys at the start of the season, but they got Ekblad and Montour back. And I would have to agree. I think overall they are probably even a better team than they were last year at this time for sure. And looking forward to the game tonight. The Penguins struggling a bit outside looking in as far as the playoff race goes, but still have some future Hall of Famers in Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Carlson. Their goaltender, Tristan Jarry, has 6 shutouts this season. So should be a lot of fun tonight here in Pittsburgh.
So because of all those games you did last year, the final 9 games for the Panthers, conference finals, and then Stanley Cup final, I mean, you're a guy, from doing Rangers games for all these years. You're around the league. How about just the atmosphere and how different the games are here? Obviously, you're in Pittsburgh tonight, but the whole fan base, Sunrise, the experience here for home games. This is a franchise that's been around now for 30 years, but we're actually in the middle of what is now finally the golden era for Panther hockey. We've never had a stretch like this before.
No, I mean, 2 years ago, you win the President's Trophy, best regular season record, go to the Stanley Cup final last year and win a series for the first time in as you know, almost 3 decades. And
Yep.
now having the season that the team's having this year, when you put those 3 years together, you're right. It is the golden age of Panthers hockey. And, I remember going to do games back in 94, 95, 96 at the Miami Arena, and then the transition to Sunrise, and worked a playoff series there in 97 when the Rangers played the Panthers. The year after the Panthers went to the Stanley Cup final against Colorado. But it's
Gretzky killed us that year. Gretzky was so good in that series.
Yeah. Gretzky, Esatikin, and they scored some big goals in that series. But it's such a fun place to go watch a hockey game, and those games during the conference final against Carolina, I'll certainly remember those for a long time. And they ran up against a juggernaut in Vegas. They just plowed through the playoffs, and the Panthers obviously had some key injuries during the Stanley Cup final, but it was a lot of fun to be a part of, and in particular, the games down in Sunrise.
They were so broken by the end of that Stanley Cup final. I mean, Tkachuk, he didn't even play the final game, and we know how tough these guys are. It's one of the things that, I mean, I've always loved hockey, but especially today, where you see the NBA and the guys, they sit out all the games and the load management. These guys are such warriors. Like Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour had to miss the first month of this season because of what they played through in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, these guys are such warriors who play this game.
No, they are. And every year when the Stanley Cup final ends and then the head coach gives the list over the next couple of days of all the injuries that the players were playing through, it's just hard to believe. I mean, I remember hearing stories about Tkachuk. He couldn't even get out of bed and get dressed by himself. He needed help from his brother Brady, and he actually played in Game 3 and Game 4, with the sternum injuries. So you just have to give these guys so much credit for what they battle through.
Is it the hardest of the major North American championships to win, the Stanley Cup?
We hear that a lot, and I think Jonathan, mainly due to what they have to go through physically. I remember hearing stories from some of the Edmonton Oilers back in 83, 84. They lost to the Islanders, who won their 4th straight cup in 83, and then they finally broke through and beat the Islanders in 84. But when you talk to Wayne Gretzky and Paul Coffey and so many of the others in that team, they still to this day reminisce about walking past the Islander locker room after losing to them in 83 and just seeing all the ice packs and the battle scars, and the Islanders, after winning that 4th cup, just sit at, Dennis Potvin, who the fans in South Florida are certainly familiar with. He was the captain of those teams. And Edmonton said they learned a lot from looking into that locker room and seeing all the pain and what the Islanders had gone through just to get there. And that was a big part of their mindset moving forward when Edmonton then won 4 in the next 5 years.
It's such a great sport. And I also love that over the last couple of years with the move back to ESPN and the games on TNT, it feels like that was such an obvious move for the league, right? They're getting so much more exposure now, right?
Well, I have to give NBC so much credit. I was a part of it for over a decade, and NBC did a tremendous job in doing the games, promoting the National Hockey League. Doc Emmerich, one of the greatest of all time, with and Pierre Maguire. And I think both TNT, who I work for, and ESPN have taken the mantle and raising the bar even higher. But NBC did a spectacular job doing the NHL for 15 years, and I'm so proud to be a part of the TNT team. And we had the Stanley Cup final, as you know, last year. We'll go through the conference final this year, Stanley Cup final again next year. So a lot of fun to work with Eddie and now Brian Boucher stepping in for Keith Jones, who took over as president of the Flyers. And the studio show does a tremendous job with Liam McHugh, Paul Bissonnette, Anson Carter, Wayne Gretzky, and then Henrik Lundqvist. On some shows, Keith Yandel, a former Panther. So a great team to be a part of.
I wanted to mention that too here, Kenny, where again, the game tonight, 7:30, NHL on TNT, Pins and Penguins. Kenny Albert, of course, has your call. It's like TNT, I feel like they did it again. Everybody knows Inside the NBA is the greatest studio show probably of all time. NHL on TNT, and you mentioned there, Liam McHugh and Paul Bissonnette and Anson Carter. Gretzky's on during the playoffs. That's a great studio show. Like, they totally did it again.
No, it really is. I put the NBA on TNT Studio Show right up there with Fox NFL Sunday, in my opinion, as the greatest pregame shows of all time. And you're right. The NHL on TNT is right there. The crew that they put together. Wayne's like the old E.F. Hutton commercials. When Wayne Gretzky talks, you have to listen. Such a tremendous hockey mind, has a photographic memory from games that he played in. Liam's an unbelievable host. Paul Bissonnette has such a following with the Spitting Chicklets and the younger audience, and he's done a great job. And Anson Carter's terrific, Keith Yandel, Henrik Lundqvist. So, again, proud to be a part of the team, and it's always a lot of fun when those guys are traveling with us, whether it's the Stanley Cup playoffs or during some of the outdoor games, the Winter Classic in Seattle last month. Just great to be around those guys, and they do a tremendous job.
Great job, Kenny. Always love having you on the show. Again, tonight, 7:30, NHL on TNT. Kenny, tell everybody again how they can get your book, which came out, of course, a few months ago.
So the book was published in October. It's called A Mic for All Seasons, a compilation of stories from throughout my broadcasting career. It has its own Instagram account if you'd like to follow the book, A Mic for All Seasons, with pictures of the book's travels, but available where books are sold, Barnes & Noble, online, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Target. Second printing coming up. It's done very well. So a second printing over the next couple of months leading up to the NHL playoffs and Father's Day. So it's a mic for all seasons. Mic is M-I-C, like a microphone, and appreciate any of the listeners and viewers who have picked it up already or who might do so in the future.
Awesome. Great job, Kenny. Thanks a lot for stopping by this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Anytime.